Our next speaker, welcome to the stage, Michael T. Jones from America, the Chief Technology Advocate at Google. Previously was Chief Technologist of Google Maps, Earth and Local Search, and you do no harm. That's right. And if you wouldn't mind trying for this seat, great, you may stand, you may sit, you may relax.
I'll stand. I've been so inspired by that.
Splendid.
Why can't we all come up here?
One by one.
Okay.
Where you go.
All right, so hello. So on the idea of technology and science, I have a sort of odd comment, which is that most of what science and technology can do, it's already been doing, which is that it's a way of thinking about reality which differs hugely from the way normal thought and judgment goes. So the first thing that happens in technology, so think about the word technology. I'm sure all of you being educated know that technology comes from the word techne. It's a Greek word. It means the practice or skill of an art. It's the source of art and science and technology and manufacturing, ability to do things. The way say, mathematician would think about something, they would have absolute certainty. They would define all of the meanings of the terms. They would derive absolute facts from that, and they would stand for all time. So if a mathematician tells you it is this way, it's always that way. It was that way for Euclid. It's that way for me. It's that way 10,000 years from now or 10 million years from now. That's a kind of knowing. There's another kind of knowing. That's the knowing of science, where you know you're wrong. So Galileo didn't really know, and Newton didn't really know, Einstein didn't know, Leibniz didn't know. But all these people, they know they don't know. I had dinner with Stephen Hawking. He said, I don't know. All I know is, given the instruments that I have, this equation fits. That's all I know. But I know all the other guys, they were totally wrong, because I can prove that, because I have better instruments. Okay? Every major advance in science is preceded by a major advance in instrumentation. You know, a better microscope, you know, an X-ray microscope, a better calculator, you know, computer. I'm a computer guy. Whatever the thing is, that enables people to discover the errors of the past, understand the reality a little bit deeper, project a little bit further, and form really reasoned judgments, always knowing they don't really know. And so a lot of the things that face our society and our planet are issues like global climate change, where we don't really know. The scientists say, we've measured it all, we're very thorough, we don't really know, but we have a 99% confidence that it's this way. And the politicians or the press or the whoever says, oh, they don't really know. You know, I think it's aliens, they think it's global climate change. It could be anything, right? That's the language of science versus the language of casual conversation, you know, the rugby language versus the science language, right? So scientists never know, but they have a very sophisticated, reasoned way of arguing and having discourse about things they kind of know, see? And that's really important. So I think one of the best things science can do, and technology behind that, is to teach the society of the world how to interpret the facts as they come forward, or the sort of understandings that we have. So to me, that's like category A, which is we can teach people how to have reasonable conversations about things they're learning. Right now, I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, I'm in America. We just had an election process where there were very few reasonable conversations about what was happening. It wasn't that person A was good or person B was good. They're both good. You know, A might be better in some ways, B better in some ways. You personally might have a philosophy more like A or B or some hybrid. You know, those are typical political things, but the conversation about them was childish, mean, shallow. It was just embarrassing to my nation. So I would love to have and that's a better conversation than the global conversation on climate change. It's the better conversation than the global conversation on ocean acidification. And there's many things like that, you know. Many conversations that are held in such a false and stilted way, the only outcome is self-deception. And so I think science and technology, if there's anything we can do in the next many years, next decades, is we can have a rise of the scientist, a rise of the technologist, just to teach people how to even talk about things so that reasonable outcomes are possible. So that's number one. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that some more. The second thing that's happened that is enormous and whose impact is not yet fully felt is the Internet's ability to connect people to talk in a way they never could talk before. So any of you could post something on Twitter now and it can be heard by 1 billion people in the next week. none of your grandparents could ever be heard by 1 billion people. Okay? The famous shot heard around the world in World War I was heard eventually by 1 billion people because of the effect of that assassination. It took a decade for people in Bolivia to hear about that. Right? It wasn't heard the next day. It wasn't heard 5 minutes later. When I meet presidents and emperors or whatever around the world, it's usually kind of a one-upsmanship thing, and they say, well, I'm the grand poobah of so-and-so. I say, well, I just work at Google, but, more people listen to us every day than have ever been in your country. So it's kind of like that. And they say, well, that's kind of scary. I told the President of the United States one time, I said, more people look at the homepage of Google search, so whatever little sentence we put under that search bar, than ever watch your State of the Union address. They will ever even hear your name. So what should that sentence say? Right? Right now it's pretty much blank, or it says something like breast cancer awareness. We have deals in place in Indonesia, so it could say tsunami coming, head for the hills. But the point is that humans can all be influenced almost instantly now, or informed, and influence is up to them, but in a way that was never possible before. In Arab Spring, you saw people who had felt hurt for 35 or 40 years, but also felt afraid to say so for fear of secret police who could talk to each other semi-anonymously and then say what's in their heart. So it would be like some situation where there's a troubled family and a marriage counselor, and they finally say the truth, and then they can reconcile. So we have 10 million people or 50 million people finally saying the truth. And the reconciliation is kind of ugly, actually, sometimes. It's not always as sweet as a couple in a psychiatrist's office. It could be tanks, and it was a lot nicer in Egypt than it was in Libya, and it doesn't seem very nice at all in Syria. So I'm not saying that it's always nice, but that conversation is a suppressed conversation that was never possible before, made possible now by the internet. So these are systemic changes in how humans talk to humans. The many-to-many conversation is now possible, and the impact of that will shake the very foundations of government around the world for all time. There's a power of information control. There's a power of a stately progress of civil society and how it chooses to incorporate changes. That is no longer a choice of government. Governments don't choose whether or not people can talk on Twitter, whether they can use Google to do things. Governments don't choose whether you can see the president's house on Google Earth. They don't have a choice about that. They don't like that, but they don't have a choice about that. So if you're a government and you're trying to imagine your algorithm for being a government, you've got to constantly think now, well, I don't really have any choice over these things. I'm just, I'm the king, but it's just a job. I can't control what people tell each other. I can't control anything. And that's actually uncomfortable, exciting, wonderful, and I believe the most important change in science and technology for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Well,
So already you can see here is the future charging towards you as if you have not necessarily much choice about your face, about the conversation, about the technology. So where do we come in, or do we just fit in behind the techs and the gadgets as they come charging towards us? Our next speaker, Professor Nadia Rosenthal, is from Britain, leader in stem cell biology and regenerative medicine at the interface of basic biomedical and industrial life, chair in cardiovascular science at Imperial College in London, and founder of the Australian Regenerative Medicine Institute at Monash. Professor Rosenthal, would you please join us? And you can stand or you can sit.
Oh, I'll have to stand, I think. Well, good evening. It's rather complicated because I have an American accent. I'm from the UK, and I'm supposedly running an institute here in Melbourne, but someday I'll explain it to myself. I'd like to talk about aging. You've heard a little bit about that and about the possibility that we will just get rid of it, and all we'll do is just traipse up to our deathbed, lie down and die peacefully. And that is a dream, and it's certainly everybody's dream who gets past 50 and realizes that the ending is not particularly happy. And especially if one has elderly parents who you see going through the ravages of dementia or other debilitating diseases. And obviously, for a society, this is probably the most familiar, but yet the least well understood aspect of biology that we face. We really don't understand aging. We understand a lot of other things, and you've heard about some of those, but we don't understand why we age. We don't understand, for instance, why it is that a mouse lives for 2 years, and a bat, which is a very close relative of a mouse, can live for 30. or why it is that some subsections of our societies seem to have a longer life than others. And we don't understand the biology of that at all. And the problem is that if we don't start understanding that biology, we're going to run into a mess, because the aging population is about to overcome our social networks and support systems in a way that I don't think we're really ever going to be aware of until it hits us as baby boomers. I think it's by 2050, there will be something like 70% more people in Europe who are over the age of 65, and there'll be a 170% increase in the number of people over 80. So unless those people are in great shape and living that life that we talked about, we're going to be really beset as a society, and it's going to have an enormous effect on our economy, among other things, as well as our well-being. So I work on aging. I'm interested in why we age and what it is that we can do to change that inevitable pathway, which we seem to be sort of headed for like a tank. So there are really three areas that we can think about, which might be ways in which we can intervene in the aging process. The first one is to change things that affect our lifespan that come from the environment: exposure to asbestos, toxic chemicals, malnutrition, all the things that we've actually largely gotten rid of in the civilized world, but developing countries still have enormous problems with longevity. We see doubling of our lifespan as not a big deal. This is still a major goal in Africa. So those sorts of interventions, however, really have to happen at a fairly early age. So you can't wait until you're 50 or 60 not to be exposed to smoking or asbestos. It doesn't really affect your lifespan at all. So there's a second way that we can intervene, and this is work that's come from biology, where we've seen that restricting the amount that animals eat has a major effect on the way they age. So they can actually double their lifespan by eating less or by being compromised in their metabolism in a way that it looks to their cells like they're eating less. Now, caloric restriction is not anybody's cup of tea, especially right before dinner, when we all can imagine what it would be like if suddenly we heard that there wasn't going to be any dinner because we were going to all live a little longer if we just went to bed hungry. So it's not likely that this is going to be a major component of a plan to save the world from the aging ravages. And not only that, you'd have to start at a fairly early age to get any real benefit, to see any real extension of our long lifespan. And then finally, there's what I work on, which is regenerative medicine, which is a sort of an alternate approach. It's rather than disease-based, it's a sort of a preventative approach. The idea is to be able to bring the organism back to where it started from, where it was. In other words, how did we form, and once we were formed, then how is it that we can maintain that state of health for as long as possible? And in this case, you're actually, as a caregiver in my dream of how the future will look, you're actually approaching the damage that's already done. So this isn't something that's going to have to wait till the next generation. It's something that we could actually envision happening in 10 to 20 years, where the damage that has been done by the asbestos, by the smoking, by the environment, by the rich dinners that we're going to enjoy very much tonight, all of that will somehow be attenuated or even reversed by some of the therapies that we're envisioning. However, we're far from there. And I think one of the major problems we have as scientists who are working in this field is to tease out the sensationalism that we've already heard about from the reality of the situation. We're continuously bombarded with extraordinary stories about stem cells and how they're going to replace every bit of our body. Well, it turns out that that's probably not how stem cells even work when they do work at all in therapeutic circumstances. And in fact, they may very well just be sort of chaperoning better behavior on the part of the organism into which you put them, rather than actually being the builders themselves and becoming part of the bricks and mortar of the new tissue. You hear about bioengineering, new hearts, 3D printing, all these wonderful, incredible, really, advances in technology. But the problem is, it's like building a house and then expecting what goes on in that house to take care of itself. And the problem is we don't know how to merge those technological advances with the basic biology that will allow us to get cells out of a person and put them into those structures and make new hearts or livers. And so we're stuck. It's a wicked problem. And there are a number of ways in which people are beginning to tackle this problem. But I think that it's something that is definitely one of the major issues that we're going to deal with as biologists. We won't be able to stay in our ivory tower. We're going to have to deal with aging for once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia.